This is the Inspired Pilot Podcast, episode 20.
Don't ever allow yourself to be pushed into doing something that you don't want to do. I have a lot of friends who said no, who have great careers now, who fly in the majors or who have, great careers in business aviation now, that type of thing. Some pilots who didn't say no, they didn't make it out alive.
Inspiring stories from inspiring pilots from around the world. Welcome to the Inspired Pilot Podcast with your host, Marvin Robinson.
Okay, welcome to the Inspired Pilot Podcast. This is Marvin Robinson, and I'm delighted to introduce today's featured inspiring pilot, Colleen Mondor. Welcome to the show, Colleen. Are you ready to inspire today?
Yes, I am.
Okay, let's go. Colleen Mondor is a freelance writer and the author of The Map of My Dead Pilots, The Dangerous Game of Flying in Alaska. She contributes regularly to Alaska Dispatch News, writing about Alaska Aviation, and owns an aircraft leasing company with her husband. I've given our listeners, the Inspired Pilots, a short introduction there, Colleen. Can you take a minute or so and give us a little bit about yourself personally, where you're from, and before we jump headfirst into your journey, can you give us a brief overview of what you're doing aviation-wise right now?
What I'm doing right now is mostly I write about Alaska aviation and both its history and the impact its history has on contemporary aviation in Alaska. Most pilots, when they think of Alaska, they think of the bush pilot myth and image. And what I write a lot about, as well as covering accidents and just daily aviation business in Alaska, is how that myth continues to affect how pilots fly and accidents in Alaska today. We have the most pilots per capita in the United States, and the 𝗬𝗂𝗀𝗃𝗃 seaplane base in Anchorage is the largest amphibious base in the world. So that's what I do mostly today, write about aviation in Alaska. I started out flying, though, in the east coast of Florida, the Space Coast, just south of Cape Canaveral, where the shuttles are launched from. That's where I grew up, and that's where I learned to fly. And that's where I got a degree in aviation. And then from there, I went to Alaska because a lot of the guys that I went to school with got jobs flying up there. It's a good place to start your career. And when I got there, I got a degree in history, and I got a job dispatching for a bush commuter out of Fairbanks, Alaska, which is the second largest city and right in the center of the state. And the 4 years that I spent there dispatching aircraft is what I wrote my book about, which is The Map of My Dead Pilots. That was my experiences working on the ground there. And then I continued on to graduate school and got a degree in Northern Studies, which is where I studied the causes of pilot error accidents in Alaska among commercial operators. And then that led to my writing career.
Wow, okay. So, okay, I'm really interested to hear about this bush pilot myth that you referred to. So we'll jump into that later on into your journey.
Okay.
So it definitely does sound intriguing there. You sort of touched on it there briefly. Every journey does have to start somewhere. So can you tell us the story, Colleen, of how you first got involved with flying and why you wanted to be a pilot? You said you were based down in Florida there.
When I say I grew up in Cape Canaveral, literally when the rockets launch, we see the launch on TV and then we walk outside on the driveway and we can see them go up overhead. I was about half an hour, 45 minutes south of the Cape. So I grew up surrounded by people who worked at the base, and aviation is, of course, hand in hand with NASA. So I was around pilots all my life, but most particularly my stepfather, who was retired Air Force. He was a lieutenant colonel, career Air Force, and then went into civilian aviation, becoming a flight instructor and working in academia at a local college that taught aviation. So he really wanted one of his children or stepchildren to fly a lot because it was his life.
He didn't care which one. He just wanted one, right?
He tried every single one, and I was the end.
Hey, congratulations.
And he was... he just passed away a few months ago. He was one of these people that, he grew up on a farm, and he ended up in aviation because of the Korean War. So it was, going to the Air Force or going to the Army. And when he got into the cockpit, it was the easiest thing in the world to him. And he just didn't understand how everybody didn't want to do this. So I decided to major in aviation because I had been around it so much and it seemed like a very exciting career path. And he said, if you do this, then I will pay for you to fly. So
is that called blackmail?
Yeah, it was great.
Or encouragement, right?
Yeah, it worked though. But I mean, flying in Florida is pretty spectacular. You fly early in the day because thunderstorms are a huge problem there, and in the mid to late afternoon. So I would take off at 7 o'clock in the morning to go practice in the practice area, and you would fly right out over the ocean, drop down to about 500 feet, and look for dolphins and sharks for a few minutes, and check out the waves, and then go head over to the practice area and practice your stalls and steep turns and all that stuff you were supposed to be doing. So it was pretty great.
Definitely does sound good.
I was glad I did that.
Okay. So every journey has its challenges for the benefit of maybe someone thinking about learning to fly or someone currently training and having their own issues right now. What did you find challenging during your PPL and how did you overcome this?
I'll be honest with you. I have a private pilot license and I got it when I was 18 years old, and it was an enormous amount of work for me. Some of the guys and girls that I went to school with, flying came pretty easily for them. It was never easy for me. I always had to study hard, and I was always behind the airplane. There's a reason why I'm not a professional pilot today. I don't think you should be flying commercially if you're behind the airplane. I think that you need to be always able to think ahead and always able to react quickly. And that was not something that came easily to me. I worried a lot. So for me, it was kind of it was something that I was determined to do. I think if you're going to work in the aviation field in any capacity, in airport management or airline management, planning and design, anything like that, I really think it's important that you know how to fly. It gives you an awareness and understanding that otherwise it's completely lacking. You really, if you're going to work in the field, I think you need to at least have an initial pilot certificate. You need to solo. You need to know what it's like to be alone in that airplane. So I hung in there because I wanted to work in aviation and I was determined to get that piece of paper. And it was pretty tough. And it's funny because my stepfather would take me up to go flying with him to help me practice different stuff. And he tried. He was very patient. I give him a lot of credit for that. But my landings were never as good as his. He would look at the runway and he would say, "Tell me where you want me to put the wheels down." And I could pick anywhere on that runway. We were flying Piper aircraft, single engine, Piper Cherokees. And I would say, put it down on the numbers or a third of the way down the runway or whatever. And he nailed it every single time, no matter, what I said or where we were or anything like that. So it was just easy for him. For me, it was not. So I think the biggest piece of advice that I give to people that are learning to fly is that you just have to stick with it. It's for some people it's easy, for some people it's not. And it just, you won't know until you try, and you just have to stick with it. And that's what I did. I just hung in there every day.
Every day. And you mentioned there that, you worried. So what did you actually worry about? What was your concern during that period?
I took off one day from an uncontrolled field, no tower, and I hit something on the runway. When I got back to my home airport, I looked and there was no blood on the plane. We thought, I was alone. I talked to my instructor about it, and we thought that I might have hit a rabbit or an armadillo, some small creature, which is pretty common when you're flying out in the boonies in the middle of Florida. But I hit something and it bumped me up. I was going just fast enough on takeoff that it got me into the air, and immediately the plane started to stall. And what's pretty common in Florida, a lot of airports, the runway butted right up against a lake. So I was in the air. I was too low. I was stalling and I was over a lake. So none of this is good. And I, was immediately sick to my stomach. I mean, I can remember it now like it was yesterday, and it's been almost 30 years. And, I did everything right. I pushed the nose down. I waited. I flew right over the water, probably at 10 or 20 feet until I built up enough speed to pull out, and I didn't stall. I handled it. But the things that I worried about was something like that happening and not doing the right thing, not being able to react fast enough. And a couple of the guys that I went to school with, there were accidents and they didn't survive. And so when you're around that, you think about, what am I going to do if I'm in that situation? And when you're 17, 18 years old, it's hard to know for sure that you're going to do the right thing. And I think that was the kind of worries that I had, that I just wouldn't be fast enough, that I just wouldn't be good enough. And even in the one time when I had to, I did it, but it didn't make the worries go away.
Wow. So that obviously shook you up a lot, and is a good testament that, and it's interesting actually, because the reason why I asked you about the worry, because even after I actually passed my test and I had my ticket and my license, there was always that sort of seat of the pants sort of worry that I used to have even prior to a flight. And it took me, a good few hours into my sort of P1 flying as a license holder to sort of get over that real, like, almost, am I going to die today kind of mentality. Yes. Serious, I'm being really honest. And it sort of diminished, but now I still get the butterflies in my stomach. I just go into this new zone of hyper focus and like, right, I'm doing everything by the book now. Like I said, a good 20 or 30 hours after I got my license, I did have that sort of, is this it? And I can't even give any sort of justification why, but that was a fear. But yeah, I understand how you must have felt at that moment in time.
I think it's pretty common, and maybe if I had been on a plan, perhaps to stay with it, where I would have moved from what's private pilot in the U.S. and then right into your commercial, your instrument, your multi-engines. The kids I went to school with that were in that program, you just move from one type of flying to the next, and you don't really have time to breathe, and you just keep moving forward. If I had been in that program, maybe it would have gotten me past it. But for me, it was always just electives, and I wasn't going to go on to become a commercial pilot. I don't know why that decision was made. It might have been a family decision. I was 18 years old, and I didn't have this huge burning desire to be a pilot like some of my classmates did. It had been their dream their whole lives. I saw it more as something that would help me to understand the career that I wanted to work in. And it certainly did that. And I'm very glad that I did it. So I think if I had picked up more time, it might have gotten me through it. But what it did was it just helped me to understand aviation and the people that are in it and the things that they have to deal with. So it worked out anyway.
Yeah, excellent. Well, it's a good place to be. So up to now, how many different aircraft types have you flown, and what aircraft do you hold the closest to your heart, and why?
Oh, well, the plane that I have the most time in is the 𝗵𝗹𝗴𝗰𝗆, single engine, low wing. What is it, like 160?
161, right?
Yeah,
There's a few different versions.
Yeah, it's been a while. That was the bulk of our fleet. The school that I went to, which is Florida Institute of Technology, we had there was 550 flight students and about 50 aircraft. So the bulk of the fleet was the Warrior, and that's the one I knew the best. That's the plane that I really liked. After that, I flew in some aircraft that I'm not, technically rated for, so I wasn't in them by myself. I was flying with others. I've flown in the Navajo. Piper Navajo, in a Mooney, in a Piper Seminole. Those are, which is a small. Well, they're all small. Let's see. Beyond that, and then the AE American Tiger, which is kind of a new trainer. It's almost like, I don't know in Britain if you call them bug smashers.
I haven't heard of that phrase, but I'll look it up. What's a bug smasher?
It's a little tiny thing that, it's good for training, but it's not going to get you anywhere. So it's mostly good for, smashing bugs.
Got it.
Anyway, the Warrior is what I have the most of my time in. It's what I knew the best. Mostly all Piper aircraft, though. And then when I got to Alaska, oddly enough, the Piper Navajo, which is a twin-engine 9-seater, was the primary aircraft in our fleet at the company that I worked for. So when I flew with the guys and they would let me go with them sometimes on cargo runs and that type of thing, it was in the Navajo. And that's the aircraft. My husband was a pilot in Alaska for decades, and that's the aircraft that he knows the best. So it's mostly Piper, low wing. That's what I know. That's what I like. That's what I'm comfortable in.
Excellent. That Navajo is definitely a beast. Okay, so you've got your pilot's license now, and you sort of mentioned earlier that you weren't planning to continue, as it were, and you just wanted to have an understanding of what it means or what it feels like to be a pilot to help you with your future career. So after you finished your PPL, what happened next?
Well, my degree in Florida is in aviation management. And the idea behind that degree is to get a job either in airline management or airport management. Some people use it as a springboard to go into planning and design, insurance, investment, anything in the aviation field. There's a lot of different places you can go to with it. So I obtained that degree and I got a job in the Palm Beach County Department of Airports in Southern Florida. Palm Beach County is where some of the richest people in the world have summer houses. You might have heard of it. So my job was in noise abatement. So what I did was I dealt with people who hated the fact that Palm Beach County had an airport.
Wow.
Yes.
That's been fun in the office.
Right. So, and I thought, well, this will be a good initial position, and it'll get me into airport management because I'm working for the county and this will be great. Palm Beach County is a World War II airport. So when it was built, it was, in a cow field. Well, then, of course, it became this place where incredibly wealthy people go to have their summer houses and things. So this huge city built up around it. And now you have this really big city with an airport right in the middle of it. And right off the departure end of Palm Beach County's main airport is Mar-a-Lago, which is owned by Donald Trump. And when I was working there, they would call. Their friends would call, and they would complain every time an airplane they felt was flying too low over the house and diminishing their ability to enjoy where they lived. So we would get phone calls not only from the Trumps, but from everybody up and down Palm Beach on the ocean complaining about airplane noise, to the extent that we had a jet come in one night out of South America. It was supposed to land in Miami. Miami was fogged in. It got diverted to its alternate in Fort Lauderdale, just a little north. Fort Lauderdale was fogged in. So by the time the 737 came screaming into Palm Beach, you had a couple of pilots on board out of South America. English is not their first language. They're getting low on fuel and it's going to land. So it came screaming in at like 2:00 in the morning. And of course they landed without a problem. I came into work the next morning and there were 75 messages on the answering machine from people calling to complain about the noise of this jet.
Yeah.
So it was my job to call each of them back and explain, here you go, just as I told you. And the bulk of them really didn't care. They said that the South Americans should have gone back to South America and shouldn't be allowed to land at this airport in the middle of the night and diminish their enjoyment of the wonder that is Palm Beach. And that is the day I realized that if I stayed in that job, I was going to hate airplanes.
Exactly.
So
in that moment then, what did you have in your arsenal of tools to deal with calls like that?
Well, what you do is you explain to them that this was an emergency situation. They were on their second alternate. They were low on fuel. There is no, you cannot land here. It's a public airport. Anybody can land there. It's never closed. And, this is the type of equipment that they were flying at the time. It was an older jet, so it was somewhat louder. Palm Beach did have noise abatement controls where if you flew in with certain aircraft that were louder, you got fined, but those fines did not exist when you were on your second alternate for weather reasons. Obviously, they weren't going to be fined. So what you're hoping is that you can appeal to reason. I understand that this jet came over your house at 2:00 in the morning, and I'm sure it was disturbing and shocking, but this jet was full of people that were in a situation that needed to be put on the ground. What I found in this particular location in the United States was mostly a complete lack of reason. When we had medevac flights come in and out at night, they would complain about the medevacs and say that the airport should have been closed. You shouldn't be allowed to bring in a medevac aircraft after midnight for any reason. There are a lot of people with a lot of money and a lot of power, and they weren't happy. And it just happened that that was the airport where I got the job. And what I saw was a side of aviation that, and dealing with the non-aviation public that I didn't like. And it was killing every part of aviation that I had loved. And, the people that I worked with, most of them weren't pilots. To them, it was just a job. And I thought, if I'm going to love aviation like I did in college, I need to go someplace else. And I had friends that were in Alaska, and they said, up here, an airplane can never be too loud. So I said, all right, sign me up. And I went to Alaska.
So a girl going from Florida, which the Sunshine State, to Alaska,
Yes.
which I'm assuming the tourist brochures just show snow and cold, right?
Yes, I'm afraid I don't know how to go from Fahrenheit to Celsius, but I can tell you the coldest I was in Fairbanks was a straight temperature was 65 degrees below zero Fahrenheit.
Wow.
And so you'll have to do something on a computer to show how that transfers to Celsius, but it was incredibly, unbelievably cold there. But, it was also, come on, it's the adventure of a lifetime, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Who could resist it? So, yeah, I went and I loved it.
So you turned up in Alaska, and what was the job there? What did you go into straight away?
The job that I went to, it was a year before I got a job strictly in aviation. I actually worked for Alaska Airlines in security first, which was pre-9/11, pre-9/11. So it was before a lot of the security rules that are in place now. We didn't have something called TSA. It was not nearly as secure as it is today. So I worked there, which was interesting. And then I got a job with what's known as a bush commuter, and this is in Fairbanks, in interior Alaska. A bush commuter is a small airline that flies a scheduled service out into the bush. And the bush in Alaska is villages and towns that basically are off the road system. And that's a huge segment of Alaska because of the geography. Most of the state is off the road system. So what they receive during the spring and summer, if they're anywhere near one of the rivers, then they get barge traffic, and otherwise everything comes in by air. So we flew 7 days a week out of Fairbanks, up and down the Yukon River area in interior Alaska, up north to the North Slope, which is up where Prudhoe Bay is and Dead Horse and the pipeline starts. And then also out to the northwest coast in the area of Nome, which is all the way up on the top, where probably people know that from, there's some awful Alaska reality TV shows now, but it's where the gold fields, there are some gold fields out there.
I've never seen that one before.
Don't need to. They're all bad. Anyway, carrying passengers, freight, and the U.S. mail every day. And I worked in dispatch. So I scheduled planes, pilots, and helped set the loads, that type of thing.
What kind of aircraft were being flown at that point?
The bulk of our fleet were Piper Navajos, which is a twin-engine 9-seaters. We also had 2 Beech 99s, which are twin turbines, Beechcraft, 15-seaters. We had some Cessna 207s, which are 5 and 6-seaters, basically. That's what we had. And that's a lot of what everybody flew up and down the ramp there, those type of planes.
Wow. Is that where you got the inspiration for your book?
That is where Map of My Dead Pilots came from. There's a lot of crashing in Alaska historically, a lot of aircraft crashing, and it's kind of almost expected, much less so now, but still not a surprise. A lot of it is blamed on the weather, the geography. What I saw, I had a college degree, and when you sit in the classroom, you learn the regulations, you learn aircraft performance, engines and systems and weather, you learn the law. And when I got to Alaska, what I found was, okay, this aircraft is rated to carry, say, 1,500 pounds with the fuel load that I've gone there, so we'll go 2,200 pounds. And I was like, what? We'll go what? So flying overloaded was routine.
Did you ever question that?
Yeah, I did. And actually, I wrote about it in the book because when I first went to work there, they lied to the pilots. They wouldn't tell them how much was really on the planes. And that was not uncommon. This is in the mid-90s. That was not uncommon back then. Wow. In Alaska. You would just put on there what could fit and what you thought as far as dispatch, particularly what the owners wanted to get on the airplane, and it'll be fine. And one of our pilots actually got out to another base that we had. It's called Galena, and they had scales out there, and he had them unload the whole airplane and weigh everything again, and of course was absolutely livid. So one of the things that I did after I had been there a while, not too long, I ended up being the head dispatcher because everybody else for different reasons ended up quitting, and I hadn't even been there 6 months. So I was there, and I said to the cargo guys, let's start telling them what's on the plane. Let's tell them. They give me a number, I'll give them a number, and let's find a way to work together, because operations and the pilots hated each other. And I just didn't see how that worked well. Plus, I mean, these guys were my friends. Most of them were my personal friends at this point, and I didn't like lying to them. So we changed the system somewhat, and it worked out a lot better because that's, I married one of them. So
he was obviously very grateful then.
Yeah. But part of it, I think, is, again, because I had an aviation background, the people that had been working in dispatch prior to that were basically what you would consider customer service agents. They were hired to ticket passengers. None of them flew. They had very little aviation experience. So they didn't understand the significance of overloading an aircraft or saying, why can't you just put it in the tail? Well, you can't aft-load an aircraft. And trying to explain that to them, they thought, as long as we can get it on, and if the pilot will take it, what's the problem? Or if one pilot will take it, why can't we make the other pilots take it? And, I just disagreed with that. So I think a lot of it was where I had come from and what I had learned in school and what I knew from flying. So it changed somewhat. Then I started learning how Alaska was and what people had been doing for a very long time there and how dangerous it could be.
You're the fresh new kid on the block. You got a shiny new pilot's license. You've been studying aviation as a major. When you turned up there and you said, you decided to make this, obviously it sounds like a major change. The pilots may have appreciated that. Your husband definitely did. But what about the management or the powers that be? How did they take that? Because obviously you were disrupting what already existed.
Well, I was lucky that when I came in there was a major shakeup at that company. A lot of things, and again, particularly in the mid-90s, a lot of the Alaskan bush commuters were kind of shoestring operations. The joke would be they were all one crash away from being put out of business. A lot of, fly-by-night type of stuff. And when I was hired, and I was the first person ever hired in operations who had any kind of a degree in aviation, and I was being paid a higher amount of money because the owners had never thought that was needed. You don't need anybody with that background. You've got a director of operations and a chief pilot. They're the primary ones that are, required by the FAA to keep an eye on this. So why worry about it? Well, the DO and the chief pilot were new to their positions as well, and they were basically trying to change the company mindset, to change the atmosphere there for how business had been done. And so when I came in there, and as I said, within a few months, everybody that I worked with was gone up front that handled operations. And so it was me and my two bosses. And I said, these are some things that I want to do. And, I've talked to the pilots. They're my friends. This is what they want to do. And so we started making these changes. So they were my ideas, and it was my discomfort that prompted some of it. But most certainly, if the gentleman that I worked for had said, no, we're not going to do that, it wouldn't have happened, and I wouldn't have stayed because I wouldn't have been comfortable lying to those guys every day. I thought it was wrong. So it worked, and they were supportive of it. And the thing is, the pilots were a lot of pilots in Alaska fly heavy. They're comfortable flying those aircraft heavy, but they need to know what they have on board. You just shouldn't be lying to pilots about that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's like all pilots should know what their envelope looks like and where their center of gravity is and fly accordingly if you actually know. But if you don't know, then you might get a little bit shocked when you need to flare or take off or just managing that climb out. Definitely could cause problems.
Exactly. And a lot of these flights, they're referred to as milk runs because it's like you're up and down all the way down the river. And it's like that flying all over Alaska. You can have a flight that goes out and it has 10 different stops. So you're subtracting and adding at every stop, dropping people, dropping freight, dropping mail, picking up, on and on and on. And so you need to know what's coming on and what's going off everywhere that you go. And one of the things they started doing in cargo was actually they would draw a map for the pilots, and they would give them a map that would show them where the mail and where the freight was for each village, where they had put it inside the aircraft. We used to joke that it looked like a bus, the way we would overload these planes. Well, not overload them, but the way they would be loaded. In Alaska, you can fly live chickens as U.S. mail. You can take a bicycle and just hang a tag from the handlebars with some postage on it. That's mail. Tires are U.S. mail. You know, we flew sled dogs. I mean, it's crazy the kind of stuff that can be on there. So, you know, they're dropping off and picking up all over the place. They need to know what it weighs so they can keep a good idea of what they've got to deal with.
Wow. So give us a few other stories that you experienced as a dispatcher.
Well, our owner came in one day and announced gloriously that we were the low bidders on the interior dead body contract for the state of Alaska. So in Alaska, there's one coroner in Alaska, and that person is in Anchorage. And if you die from other than natural circumstances, then you have to be autopsied and you have to be flown to Anchorage. So out of Fairbanks, that contract is held by Alaska Airlines, and they have lead line caskets and everything. The body is transferred over to Alaska Airlines and put in this very specific casket and flown down to Anchorage. But coming in from the bush, it's contracts. It's by little bush commuters that do it. And we were the low bidders for a couple of years on the interior body contract. So that meant that if you died in the middle of Alaska, we handled you. So people were shot, stabbed, hung, drowned, four-wheeler accidents, truck accidents, just every manner of death that you can imagine we dealt with. And what the Alaska State Troopers did was they came by and dropped off this stack of body bags one day and said, here you go. If you need more, let us know. And we're all looking at this. The company owner is thrilled to pieces because it's money. And then he goes back into his office and we get our first call, which is there'd been a stabbing in one of the villages where we fly out to. So they went out there and here's our pilot. And in the bush, most of the villages don't have police officers. They have what's called a village public safety officer, who more often than not is related to the person who's deceased. So all of a sudden our pilots are, you're loading up a body in a body bag, you're flying them back into town. My cargo guys, the guys who worked for me in operations who did the loading and unloading, take one look at the airplane and say, I make $10 an hour, and that is really not enough to do this. So
I can imagine.
We've got to unload bodies. Yeah, and then we put these bodies in the back of either a truck or a van, which is a company vehicle, and drive them on a dirt road over to Alaska Airlines with paperwork that says, I did not kill the person in the back of this vehicle. I have paperwork proving that this person actually needs to go to Anchorage to be autopsied. That just was weird the entire time that we did it. There was a hanging in the village of 𝗟𝗏𝗏𝗏 one day. They flew out with the state trooper. Our pilot got out there. It was a female state trooper. She was very tiny. They got up to where the gentleman was hanging from a tree, and she was too short to cut him down. So our pilot had to cut him down. He came back into town and was just furious about it. This is crazy that we're having to do this kind of thing now. And we made money. That's what we did. So that was a bad thing.
I can imagine your boss at that point, he obviously was thinking about money. Hey, maybe we could just include them on the milk run. Passengers, chickens, mail, and bodies. Excellent.
Well, the thing about the dead body contract was they chartered the whole plane. So it's like charter rate on the plane. And that's just fantastic as far as he was concerned. And it's a state charter, which means that the state of Alaska is paying for it. So, of course, you can charge them a lot and they're going to pay. So, yeah. But
was anything less morbid?
That was bad. Yes, I do have something less morbid. Every year, hunting season starts in about mid-August, and that's mostly sheep, and then it runs into moose and caribou. So through August, September, you have a lot of people who have spent their whole lives saving up money to come to Alaska and hunt, and it's been a dream. for most of them. And that was fine. I mean, it was always pretty funny what people's definitions of camping would be. The way Alaska is set up, you just can't run up there and go hunt. You have to get a license. And typically on these big hunting trips, you have to work with specific guides. And the whole state is set up that way. It's pretty regulated and controlled, which I think is probably a good thing. Yeah. But anyway, we had this crew of guys come up from Kentucky, really nice guys. There were five or six of them, saved for years and years to come up. This was going to be their great male bonding trip. And they also flew up an entire team of Kentucky bloodhounds that were going out in the bush with them because they were going out. I think they were hunting bear. I can't remember. But I can remember we were standing out on the ramp and the cargo guys are loading. And here's this 8 or 10 Kentucky bloodhounds howling as the planes taxi by. And I thought, I have a 4-year degree in aviation.
Unbelievable.
I never took a class that said I was one day going to be loading dogs to go on a Piper Navajo down to interior Alaska to hunt bear. But so you did some pretty amazing, wild, fun things too.
What did the pilot say?
Well, they're mostly concerned about, are you putting them on crates and what gross stuff are they going to do in the planes? But they didn't like flying dogs.
Yeah.
But those dogs were great. And I do have to say, the guys that they went out there with, that was pretty neat. They were so excited and the trip ended up being everything they wanted to be. They were just so happy to be in Alaska. And that was kind of cool when we met a lot of tourists and a lot of people that were really hoping to see Denali, which is Mount McKinley, the highest mountain in North America, or just go out and fly under the Northern Lights, stuff like that. And that was pretty neat to talk to those people and be able to help them achieve this big thing from their bucket list. That was always good.
Yeah, it's definitely good. So it sounds like there's a lot of inspiration there for your book, but tell us how that book came about.
Well, and when I went into graduate school, you have to do a master's thesis. And one of the things that bothered me when I was working was that the probable cause for a lot of the accidents would end up being the pilot. The pilot's continued flight into adverse weather conditions, or VFR into IMC, which is flying under visual flight rules into instrument meteorological conditions. It would just be the pilot, and that would be the end of it. And I knew from working in operations that a lot of times there were people on the ground that would pressure the pilots. There's passenger pressure. There's a lot of pressure from the post office. If you don't move the mail, they would transfer it to a company that would. There were companies where the owners would say, if you don't take this flight, I'll give it to a pilot who can, and you're out of here, you're fired. So I knew that this pressure existed. And then as we talked about before, what's called Bush syndrome, or the effects of the Bush pilot myth, which is where you feel like you have to go to prove yourself, because that's what pilots do in Alaska. They go. So it was very frustrating for me to see that the pilots always get blamed and it never got past the pilots. These pilots died, but the same accidents kept happening over and over and over again. So in grad school, I researched it all, researched the pressures, did a lot of work on the history of Alaska flying back to the 1920s when it began there commercially, and how the same accidents happened again and again. And the name of my thesis was Just One More Dead Pilot, and the causes of pilot error accidents among commercial operators in Alaska. So after that, and I graduated, the Flight Safety Foundation heard about it, and they wrote a whole issue of their magazine come out, which was devoted to my thesis and the research that I had done.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. And the feedback that I got from them and from some other people that wrote it was there was something here. There were people that wanted to know about this and wanted to know beyond the headlines of, oh, bad weather equals crash in Alaska. Well, is there something more to this than what people thought? And so I started doing a few articles, and then it became the book.
Fantastic. So yeah, that's interesting. So your master's got a lot of interest and obviously shook up a little bit of the industry there, and then that turned into the book. What kind of feedback have you had so far from the book?
The most that I was concerned about was pilots with experience in Alaska, if they would see that it was true for them. One of the things that I did in the book is I didn't write the name of the company that I worked for. I just referred to it as the company, which is what everybody says up there. The company's making me do this. The company wants me to go here. And they're all the same. And what I wanted was for it not to be a book about this particular company, but any company in Alaska. And I have heard from a lot of pilots, both current and former, that it was true to them, which is all that mattered to me. So that worked out really well. And then the overall positive feedback from it is what helped me to, really get my freelance career going and write for Alaska Dispatch, which is the primary newspaper. It's in Anchorage. So that helped. The NTSB liked it a lot. That's our National Transportation Safety Board. We actually have offices in Alaska. The Alaska region is a regional office of the NTSB because there are so many plane crashes up there. And those gentlemen and ladies have been very supportive of it as well. So the book worked out real well.
Okay, so based on your experience, obviously, as a dispatcher, being very close to the pilots, what kind of pressures are they under exactly? You said Alaska pilots just go, but, what are they under? I'm assuming commercial pressures?
Yes, there's several different ones. The post office is very unique in Alaska in that because we have so few roads, an enormous amount of the mail is moved by air. And the only way that the commuters are allowed to really financially keep afloat is through those mail checks. Otherwise, the ticket prices would be just extravagantly high for passengers. So the mail is incredibly important. I mean, the mail flies on Delta and United and everybody elsewhere, but they also have tons of other income streams. They don't need just the mail. The mail is huge in Alaska. So it was not uncommon back in the 90s in particular, and before that, for the post office manager in a village to call and say, the mail is still sitting here, you haven't taken it. If you don't take it, it's going to another airline. And it's very regimented who can carry it into every village. You have contracts that you receive, but if you don't fulfill that contract, it's taken away from you and given to somebody else. So there's pressure from the post office. There's pressure from passengers because everybody in Alaska is very accustomed to the planes always going. Now, it doesn't mean that if you stand in front of a room of passengers and you say to them, look, it's too dangerous, it's illegal, we're not going to fly, the weather's awful. Okay, they'll get it. They understand that. But if they can stand there and say, let's go, let's go, let's go, and make you think twice about it, then that's what they're going to do. And it's historically always happened. People expect to be able to get you to push the weather, and pilots will, when you're standing in front of a room full of passengers who want to go home, it's very hard to say no. And then the other thing, of course, is the companies. Different companies, it's still a problem up there where management will have what's called an unsafe corporate culture, where they will ask the pilots to push their limits. Or they will have maybe some pilots that are more comfortable. If you've been flying in lower weather conditions for a while, scud running is a common term. Some guys who've been doing it for years, they're comfortable with it. You've got some new guy who's just come up there and they'll say, look, Joe over here can do it. Why can't you do it? So you go. You don't want to lose your place in the seniority. You don't want to lose a good slot on the schedule. One of the things I wrote about is the penalty box. If you didn't get the flights in, some of the companies, they'd put you in the penalty box where you'd fly the biggest piece of crap airplane that the company had, the one that didn't have heat maybe, or the heater didn't work well, or the seat wasn't comfortable, that kind of thing. So pilots would be pushed to fly. And then the other one is just Bush syndrome, where you're in Alaska and you feel like it's what you need to do. And in order to prove yourself, and you're going to live forever anyway.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting and scary at the same time. It's almost like a lose-lose situation, isn't it? And just live by the skin of your teeth.
Well, it's very frustrating because on the one hand, Alaska in general wraps itself around this frontier image of itself. And everybody who's seen any sort of Alaska reality TV or read about it in magazines, it's not just Alaska. Everybody is in love with that image of Alaska. It's kind of the last Wild West that America has. So on the one hand, Alaska does quite well by saying, come up here. It's crazy cold up here. It's wide open spaces. We've got wolves, we've got bears. You name the animal that wants to kill you, we've got something like that. So it's a very
really want to go there.
It's an exciting, dramatic, awe-inspiring place.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just so it is larger than life in that regard, and people like that. But on the flip side, you shouldn't want that in your aviation company. You shouldn't want that in your pilot. I mean, we would see that all the time. People would come in the door and they would say, I want a real Alaskan bush pilot. I want somebody who looks like he's really been out there. Well, our guys are in their 20s and 30s. They're married. They have children. They drive 4-door vehicles. They're going to the grocery store after their flights today because they're people.
Real people, not this myth.
Yeah, we're not caricatures that are coming out here to perform for you. And honestly, don't you want some guy who's got a 4-door car and kids to pick up after school? Don't you want someone who's not going to take chances? That's what you want in your Delta Airlines pilot. So what is it, that makes you want this crazy image when you come up here? Well, it's been sold forever. It's been sold forever in Alaska, and people have embraced it forever. And it's, it's just really hard to conquer. There are a lot of carriers, a lot of companies in Alaska that certainly have conquered it, but it's still a problem. And, the tourists they don't want to see pilots in uniforms. They want flannel shirts and boots.
Fantastic. Wow, what a picture. So where can your book, The Map of My Dead Pilots, be found now?
It's online. I believe it is. It's certainly available at Amazon. It is available in Britain, at Amazon UK, and then of course, bookstores, particularly in Alaska. But it's easy to order. It's in print, both in hardcover and paperback still, and Kindle. It's an ebook too.
Excellent. Okay, well, I'll make sure that's linked to you in your show notes as well. So, what are your current activities? What are you excited about right now?
Well, I write a lot for Dispatch, and doing that, I've seen the slow evolution in aviation since the book came out in Alaska, where things are they're kind of trying to turn the boat around a bit, so to speak. So, in fact, I just had a long conversation the other day with the head of the NTSB in Alaska about what they're trying to do to go after unsafe corporate culture and say, look, we have to move beyond the pilot if we really want to improve the safety idea up here. What I would like to see is that when a plane crash happens in Alaska, if you go online to CNN or any of these major news outlets, the first thing that they say shouldn't be, oh, well, the weather is difficult and everyone's dependent upon flying in Alaska. They should say, what are the specific circumstances behind this crash, like they would anywhere else? It shouldn't just be so easily dismissed. So I've been and continue to write a lot about how the history of Alaska influences the modern day operations of Alaska in terms of its aviation, and how we need to kind of close the door on that history and say it was a great thing, but we need to be looking towards the future more. It's the 21st century. We have the technology. So we have gotten over the hump in terms of learning about the weather in different situations. Now we need to get the mindset that says, okay, this is how I'm going to fly. And that's the book that I'm working on today, the negative impacts of the bush pilot myth, and how we need to embrace the change that most of the rest of the world has already embraced.
Fantastic. So is that a new book coming out?
That's a new book I'm writing.
Excellent. Okay, so let's watch this space then. We'll keep tracks of that. That's really interesting. So based on what you know, you've obviously researched this, you've got one book behind you, you're in the process of writing another one. Let's be real now. What do you see happening in the next 5 or 10 years that's going to make a difference to these stats?
The only thing that's going to make anything change is what always makes anything change, and that's money. Insurance is much more costly if you crash a lot. And right now, there's a huge investigation going on with the largest scheduled carrier in the state over a series of accidents that they had in 2011, 12, and 13, in which several people were killed. And what they're looking at is an unsafe corporate culture with that company. And what's going to change it is the FAA and the Federal Aviation Administration and the NTSB just bringing so much pressure down to bear on a company and saying it's going to be so expensive for you in terms of penalties and lost revenue because we're going to give you fines. We're going to publicize the fact that you're not making good choices, that good choices will become the smart way to operate. And that's what will make the difference. I really think it's money. And if people demand that their companies be safe, then their companies will be safe. So the passengers and, Alaskans just need to say, we're tired of this. We're tired of accepting this. And we're tired of saying that dead pilots are an okay price to pay to fly in Alaska. I just think it's wrong. So that's where it looks like we're moving now. And that's the kind of stuff that I've been writing about for the paper anyway.
I assume as well then, if it is down to, as you say, money, which does obviously make sense, will those costs get passed down to the customers, the guys receiving the mail, the passengers? Are they ready for that?
Well, what's funny is the mail won't get transferred if nobody else will carry it. If the post office says we're going to transfer this mail and everybody on the field says we're not flying either because it's not safe, and then the mail won't get transferred, then the ticket prices will stay the same and the planes won't crash. And then the companies won't have to pay insurance costs. They won't be hit by civil lawsuits or anything else. So right now it's been short-term money that most of the companies have looked at. I want to make more money today by stealing his mail or stealing his passengers or whatever else.
Yeah.
The shift that's happening is long-term financial well-being. And, like I said, it sounds like an awful thing, but in the past, a dead pilot was an okay price to pay. And now, it needs to not be. Over the long term, a lot of crashes, they do become expensive.
Yeah, I totally understand. And I hope, things do change. Yeah, definitely looking forward to your new book when you finally finish it. Okay, so no worries. So what is your proudest moment in your aviation career so far? Tell us that story.
Oh, my proudest moment, it's probably it has to do not with that's tough because it's certainly not with flying. It probably has more to do with writing and the title of my thesis, which is this whole concept, just one more dead pilot. A friend of mine flew into the side of a mountain, and I wrote about this in the book. It was a clear day, and he was a college friend who had followed us all up to Alaska, and he was chasing a pack of wolves, which is pretty much as Alaskan as it gets, right? And you fly down low and kind of spook them and get them to run. And so there you are. It's this crystal clear day, and you're following this pack of wolves in Alaska. I mean, it's National Geographic type stuff. And
Yeah.
he was carrying a load of mail, which in this case was about 800 pounds of soda pop,
Yeah.
which is mailed. And he flew into a box canyon and he tried to climb out of it and he didn't have enough room. And he hit the top and he cartwheeled down the backside and burned. And he was, I think he was 26, 27 years old when he died. So the FAA, there was a couple FAA inspectors that went out there with the NTSB to see what happened. And they came back. They knew he was a friend of mine. And these guys were my, I knew them with the FAA. They were good guys. And I said, it must not have been his fault. It must have been the company he was with. He must have been pushed to fly. He wouldn't have done this otherwise. And he said, Colleen, the thing you need to understand is this is just the way it is. Pilots crash every day up here. And unless they've got a load of school children on board, it's just one more dead pilot in Alaska. And that's just it. And I know he was your friend, but that doesn't mean much. So I think my proudest moment was taking that and saying that that's too much for me. It was really his death. His name was Sean. It was his death that was the catalyst for me that there's precious little I can do at this company. I can make this company safer, but I can't do much else anywhere else sitting here behind this desk. But that was then, all right, I'm going to make that the focus of my master's degree. And then I'm just going to keep pushing it. And so it's him. He wasn't, the thing is it's not like he was particularly spectacular in the grand scheme of things. He was just a nice guy. Nice guy shouldn't die in such a stupid way and, be just forgotten, I guess.
Yeah, well, like you said there, Sean was the catalyst for all the stuff that you're actually doing now. So in terms of your books and your writing, so he didn't die in vain, as it were.
Yeah, well, and I like to think that my writing will make some people just change a little bit of how they look at it. When you see those images of these brave, bold pilots in Alaska, and when you go into the museums, and we do have this amazing aviation history. I just spent months working on a new aviation exhibit that's going up in the State Museum in Juneau, our capital. It's a great history, and it's very glamorous, and it's very romantic. But when you see that, you need to see the bad side of that, which is a lot of young men, primarily men, died in extremely preventable accidents. And in Alaska, it just keeps happening. So I like to think that by saying to people, look, maybe you don't want to hear this, but you need to, that maybe finally I can help them to break that pattern and move on to the 21st century, where it might not be quite as exciting, but everybody gets to go home at night. And that's really what matters.
It definitely does matter. So well done for that. So what are your future plans or aspirations? You've got the book there, but what's next for Colleen?
It's funny. I'm doing a lot of writing, and then my husband and I, we have a business where we buy aircraft and we lease them out. And he stopped flying. He has about 15,000 hours, almost all of it Alaska time. The coldest, okay, yeah, you can translate this one to Celsius as well. The coldest he ever flew with wind chill was 120 below zero, which is just insane.
It's just ridiculously cold, yeah.
Yeah, it's completely ridiculous. So, we have a company that we would like to grow. We like working in aviation in the business end of it. And I like writing, and I have a lot more to say this story and others about aviation. I found that a lot of people know how to fly. A lot of people don't necessarily know how to write about flying or have a desire to write about flying, I guess. And I think there's just a huge field there to explore and to find new stories in. And that's something that I've really enjoyed doing. So that, and to never be as cold as I was in Fairbanks in the winter again.
Fantastic. Oh, awesome. Okay, Colleen, this is my favorite part of the show. This is the quick fire checklist. This is where I ask you a series of questions and you come back to us, the inspired pilots, with amazing and inspiring answers. How does that sound? You ready?
Terrifying, but go ahead.
Okay. What is the best piece of advice related to flying that you've ever received?
Always have a way out. I just got that from a gentleman not too long ago who flies on Mount McKinley. And he said, always have a back door. Always be able to turn around. Don't ever be trapped in a situation.
I think that definitely relates to the Sean situation there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Alongside the map of my dead pilots. But can you recommend one aviation related book?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's called The Flying North. It's by Jean Potter. She wrote the book in 1943. She went up to Alaska and interviewed the original bush pilots or the friends of the original bush pilots. Hers is the only one that was basically on the ground where she talked to them, not where she talked to people, decades later or read their diaries or whatever else.
Real time.
It's fascinating stuff, really crazy stories.
Okay. The Flying North by Jean Potter. I'll make sure that's linked to alongside your book in the show notes.
Great.
Okay, it's my favorite question now. If you had a time machine and could go back in time and meet your younger self just as you're about to start your flying journey, knowing what you know now, Colleen, what advice would you give yourself?
It's not as scary as you think.
Yeah.
I think that, the idea of flying was so scary to me, and it wasn't as scary as I thought. And if I could have known that then, I think I would have relaxed a lot more.
Excellent advice there, and definitely something for people thinking about learning to fly. Like you say, it's not as scary as you think, and I can relate to that as well. Thank you for that. Okay, Inspired Pilots, you can find all the links to all the resources and everything else we've been talking about in today's episode by going to inspiredpilot.com and search for Colleen in the search bar to find the show notes for this episode. Listening to your story, Colleen, and the stories, especially about the Alaska bush stories you've been sharing, have been inspiring and pretty scary. I'm sure the listeners are going to be just as frightened as well. can you give the audience of Inspired Pilots one last piece of guidance and then share how people can get in contact with you, and then we'll sign off?
I guess in terms of guidance for planning your aviation career, I would say don't ever allow yourself to be pushed into doing something that you don't want to do. I have a lot of friends who said no, who have great careers now, who fly in the majors or who have, great careers in business aviation now, that type of thing. Some pilots who didn't say no, they didn't make it out alive. So always be willing to stand up for your own limitations and to say, this is not something I'm comfortable doing, and don't let somebody push you. As far as getting in touch with me, I've got a website. It's 𝗟𝗲𝗴𝗰𝗆.com. And my email address is Colleen@𝗟𝗲𝗴𝗰𝗆.com. And I'm sure Marvin will have that up on the Inspired Pilots site. So thanks.
I will do. Okay, Colleen, thank you very much for joining us on the show, for your time today. And you've been very generous. On behalf of the Inspired Pilots, I'd like to say thank you and speak to you again.
All right. Thanks a lot, Marvin. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for joining me today for episode 20 of the Inspired Pilot podcast. It was really great talking to Colleen today. I really like the way that she's brought the Alaskan bush pilot myth, as Colleen refers it, to the table, and really raising awareness where, from what it sounds like, is a subset of an industry with some serious issues. The phrase she used, "Don't worry, it's just one more dead pilot," that doesn't really resonate with me as a human being, let alone how it makes me feel as a fellow pilot. Even though Colleen decided not to take her flying career past the PPL stage, this grounding, this appreciation and knowledge of what it takes to fly an aircraft laid a great foundation to build on, supporting the rest of her career. I must admit, I'm a bit of a sucker, and I do love the old bush pilot tales. So, previous guests, Darren Fuller, Mike Lesser and Owens Up, all started their aviation careers out in the bush in Australia. The first guest on the Inspired Pilot podcast, Matt Dearden of the 𝗬𝗏𝗴𝗰𝗆 fame, is still out there living his dream out in Indonesia. Colin sharing detailed insights into some of the realities of the Alaskan bush pilots does push some of that romance to the side somewhat, I guess, to expose some of the ugly truths, but hopefully at the same time raising awareness, change and saving lives. Let's see how much changes in the future. Colin's book, Map of My Dead Pilots, The Dangerous Game of Flying in Alaska, has some great reviews, so I'm really looking forward to my copy to arrive so I can find out more about this Alaskan bush pilot myth. I've included links to Colin's book on her show notes page. Don't forget to head over to the show's website, inspiredpilot.com. That's where you'll find the show notes for every episode. You can also leave a comment for Colleen just below her show notes page, find all the links to all the resources mentioned, and much, much more. I really appreciate and love receiving feedback about the show. I'm active on Facebook and Twitter, and I reply to every single email, so do get in touch. If you do like the show, don't be shy, don't be greedy. I'd really be grateful if you share it with your friends, colleagues and fellow AvGeeks. And if you do feel inclined, please leave a rating and review on iTunes with as many stars as humanly possible, as this helps increase the show's exposure and therefore getting the journeys of our featured inspiring pilots in front of, and as I always say, inspiring more people, which is the whole mission of the podcast. And as always, don't forget, wherever you are on your pilot journey, get ready to be inspired.